Welcome to another lecture that's part of our Wildlife in the Wren series. This evening we're joined by two wonderful speakers from Birds of Poole Harbour. That's Paul Morton and Brittany Maxted. Right, thank you very much for joining us with Wessex Museums to tell us all about ospreys. I'm just going to tell our audience a little bit about who you guys are. So Brittany Maxted runs the Osprey project. She's heading the team that's responsible for the care and the release and monitoring of these young birds. She's also a PhD student at Bournemouth University studying the UK osprey population. So welcome, Brittany. We very much look forward to hearing about your expertise on ospreys and essentially, your PhD sounds amazing. I think it's the PhD that most of our listeners would love to do, actually.
Well, yeah, I'm very privileged, yeah.
Great topic. A little introduction to Paul. Paul Morton is one of the founders of the local charity Birds of Poole Harbour, and he's a passionate conservationist. And I can say that from the heart because, Paul, we've done 2 boat trips together and you exude excitement and enthusiasm about these, feathered friends of ours flying around. About as much enthusiasm as I have for rocks, actually. So I'm matching you there. Paul has spent much of his life monitoring and assessing Poole Harbour's bird populations. And when I've been out on the boat trips with you, I've been astounded as to your level of commitment to record data. And, we saw each other last summer when you were ringing that bird with the yellow feathers.
Yellow wagtail.
You were ringing its leg and I was like, oh my God, I was terrified. But I thought it was an incredible thing to watch. It was wonderful. So it's lovely to have you here. Just a little bit about what you're going to talk about, a little kind of introduction for our listeners. In 2017, a project began in this area to try and return ospreys as a breeding species to the south coast, where they have been extinct here for nearly 200 years. And I'm sure you guys will talk about why that happened and why that is. Led by Birds of Poole Harbour, this charity that was established in Dorset, the project is now in its 5th year. And there's some really exciting news with a very real prospect of seeing these incredible birds of prey breeding here once very soon. And also, that's not the end of the story, because Poole Museum and Birds of Poole Harbour will be working together on some really exciting projects later this year. So it's simply a case of watching this space, particularly on those digital channels, if you do follow Birds of Poole Harbour on all of their socials. So over to you guys. Thank you so much. And I'll catch up with you in the questions.
Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you very much.
We will share our screen.
We good? Can everyone see that? Excellent. Thank you very much. Wessex Museums for inviting us to come and talk about this subject. It's something we've been working really hard on for the last 5 years and putting a huge amount of time, effort and passion into trying to re-establish or restore a lost population of osprey here in Poole Harbour and in Dorset. We'll just do a really quick intro as to kind of who we are and what we do. So we are a very local charity focused purely on the Poole Harbour area, boosting the profile of bird conservation, observation and education within that geographical area. And we do that through a whole range of different projects and education tools and events, practical conservation projects. And it is basically all done on pure adrenaline. We live and breathe Poole Harbour. All of us involved in the charity have been monitoring and obsessing about Poole Harbour and its bird life for decades, actually. And it's a very, very special place. We're not landowners ourselves. We don't have great big nature reserves that we're managing. But what we do is we work with all the local stakeholders within the Poole Harbour area. For those of you that don't know where it is, it's a lovely situation slap bang in the middle of the south coast. And it is a really important and very, very special area for lots of different reasons. So we work with all the landowners. We work with BCP Council. We work with RSPB, National Trust, Dorset Wildlife Trust, private landowners, tenant farmers. And we raise money. We identify areas that either need improvement, or we see a project opportunity, and we'll approach the landowners and say, look, we've got an idea for how we think we can make things better for education or for birds or for habitat. Would you like to work with us? And it's a really nice model. It works very, very well. but we're also obsessed with the data as well. And one thing we kind of try and portray with Poole Harbour is how it all flows and functions as one full ecosystem. So one of the examples we give is that, you know, the avocets that visit us every winter in Poole Harbour, it used to be the largest overwintering population, but sadly it's now the 4th or 5th. But still we get about 1,500 avocet visit us every winter. They spend high tide on the Brownsea Lagoon, but then they'll go up into the northern fringes of the harbour, into Holmes Bay, into Litchett Bay, or into the far southwest. And the nightjars is another nice example. They breed on the heathlands around the harbour, but they don't just stay on the heathlands. They travel up the river valleys, they're going up across the towns, and some of them are even actually crossing the Solent. So what we see as our role with Birds of Poole Harbour is really getting the nitty gritty, the absolutely fine detailed data of all of the things that are going on in and around the harbour and piecing it all together. What you can see here on this screen and on this map, this is our geographical boundary for the Poole Harbour area. So everything within this boundary is what we class as Poole Harbour. And it's important, like I said, so I mean, the whole of Poole Harbour is an SPA, so that means it's a special protection area. And it gets that designation because of certain numbers of species that visit us. So we have nationally and internationally important numbers of waders and wildfowl that visit every winter. We have nationally important numbers of little egret. We have all the heathlands in the harbour, so they're all treble SIs. We've got about, 12, 13 treble SIs, sites of special scientific interest. Special areas of conservation. Poole Harbour is a designated Ramsar site, so it's recognised internationally as a internationally important wetland. It's bloody fantastic. So we spend all our time kind of working on getting the data and analysing why it's so special, helping keep it maintain, or helping maintain the SPA designations. But this evening we're going to spend time talking about a very specific bird, which is this beautiful bird of prey, the osprey. And it's an amazing story, actually. I mean, Brittany's going to take over in a second and talk a bit more about the history, but this is a bird that's been increasing as a visitor to Poole Harbour over the last couple of decades. It's a specialist fish eater, so very, very, very rarely does it eat anything else other than fish. It's a migratory species that's traveling back and forth between mainly West Africa or Southern Europe and up into the northern parts of Europe to breed. And they are beautiful. And what we're going to do tonight is talk to you about the process that we're involved in with how we translocate these birds and get them to try and get them to re-establish down here on the south coast of Britain, but also tell a lovely story of everything that's happened to us and the ospreys as time's gone on over that 5-year period, because it's just been manic, hasn't it?
It has. It's been a roller coaster. But what we'll do is we'll start off with what is an osprey and where do you find it? So this is the most recent distribution map from the IUCN of where ospreys are found. And you can see that from the dark green areas, there are a few places where they are resident breeding birds. So they're found there all year round. As you can see, it's a very pan-global species, so it's found on every single continent with the exception of Antarctica. But most of the places where they are found, they're either breeding there just in the summer or wintering there in the winter or on passage. So you can see over in the UK and much of Northern Europe, they are passage birds. And in the very highest reaches, that's where they are breeding. But what we want is for much of that blue area, the light blue area, for them to actually be breeding there, to be native breeding birds. As Paul mentioned, they are migratory. So the the European population is a migratory group, and they go from, this is an example from our colleagues at the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. This bird here was tagged up in Scotland. It was fitted with a satellite tracker, a really powerful conservation tool, and it migrated down through the UK, France, Spain, and then down over the Sahara into West Africa. And that's a very typical migration route for a European osprey to take. The European osprey is regarded as a subspecies of the osprey globally, and actually there's some debate whether there are two separate species in the world, but it's very difficult to tell, but I'm sure genetics will give us the answers to that very soon. At one time, the osprey would have been across much of that map, and indeed it was here in Dorset and across much of southern England. The only reason that it's not is because of human persecution. You'll see there it says mullet hawk. That was the old Dorset and southern name for the osprey, and it's very true to that name actually. Now that we've got them back in the harbour and we're seeing them regularly, we are seeing that they are mostly catching and eating mullet. So that's a very accurate description that they used to give that bird. The reason that they aren't is because of human activities, and it's because of that very habit of taking fish, not necessarily mullet, but taking fish, that led them into conflict with humans. So ospreys exclusively eat fish, as Poole said, and back in the Middle Ages, fish was a very important part of the diet for many people. So they became seen as a pest, and they were shot and persecuted for that reason. And then as the population declined quite severely, not just in the UK, but actually all over the world, and particularly in Northern Europe, the species was becoming scarcer and scarcer, and that meant that they became more valuable to egg collectors and to people who were collecting the adult birds for specimens. And what that actually meant was that the species went extinct as a breeding species across much of Northern Europe, and in particular in the UK. So the last breeding in England was in 1847, and the last recorded breeding in Scotland was in 1916. And then followed a period of roughly 40 years where there's the odd record, but there's nothing solid to prove that those birds were still here. And then something very exciting happened, and I'm hoping a few people may have been to this location. Loch Garten in 1954 saw the return of the osprey to the UK, and they think it was probably a Scandinavian pair, so probably two birds who'd found their way over to the UK. They wouldn't have come together, they probably just happened upon each other, and they set up a nest there. Obviously, as the only nest in the country, this was a very, very sensitive site, and they did a great deal with volunteers to try and protect that nest. They had a few successful breedings in the 50s, but they also had some persecution. There were definitely egg collectors coming, and unfortunately, the pair did fail on several occasions because of egg collectors. So George Waterston, who was in charge of the site at that time, and who's renowned as being a very important ornithologist and conservationist within the country, he had the idea to open the nest site up to viewing by the public. And this was very unusual. You think this is the only nest in the country of this species, and they've opened up the location to the knowledge to the public. But it was brilliant. It was absolutely genius. And the public came, they saw the birds, they loved it, and they became custodians of that nest. And actually, members of the public and the general population have been really crucial in the conservation of this species ever since that time. Some of you might recognise that chap on the left there. That is Roy Dennis, who we now work with, and who, since he was in his 20s, has dedicated his whole working career to the conservation of this species. The population from here has grown very, very well. So a huge part of Scotland has been recolonised, and as that's gone on, they've done a great deal of monitoring as well. So this is a young osprey chick. You can tell it's a chick, not just because of its size and also some of the down on it, but you can see also it's got that beautiful fringing to each of the feathers, and that's something that wears down over time, and then they will molt all their feathers over their first winter. You can see here what's being done is they're adding rings, and this is a really important part of the monitoring of these birds. So the ring that's being fitted to the leg there, that's a British Trust for Ornithology ring, and any birds that are ringed, like Angela and Paul did last year with the wagtails, they are providing a unique identifier to that bird, so that if it's ever recovered, alive or dead, they will have a record and they will know where that bird has come from. In ospreys, we also fit them with Darvik rings, which is a really powerful tool for monitoring them because they can be read at a distance. So it doesn't rely on catching an osprey, which, believe me, is very hard to do. You can see that in the field using a telescope, and that allows you to identify that bird. And you can learn a great deal about that bird's life history, and that actually forms a part of my PhD data. So the population grew really quite fantastically from there. There's now estimated to be 300 breeding pairs in the country, probably more, but they're still quite confined to the Highlands of Scotland, actually. And it was in the 1990s that it was decided that a greater conservation intervention was needed to try and encourage them to colonise other areas. So a method was trialled that had first been done in the United States, which is translocation of ospreys. And we're going to talk through the process of that a little bit later. But what that did was really, really crucial. So they took young chicks from Scotland, from the Scottish population, a healthy area of the Scottish population, and used those birds to establish a new population at Rutland Water in the Midlands, again, somewhere hopefully some of you have visited in the past. And it was in 2001 that they had the first successful breeding in England for, again, yes, a very long time, centuries. That was the first breeding. And that was a result that they had really hoped for, but quite an unexpected result that they hadn't anticipated, was that translocation also resulted in the establishment of the Welsh population. So some of those birds dispersed hundreds of kilometres west, and there were two separate translocated birds that actually set up nests in Wales. And this is the Glaslyn nest. This is one of those nests that they first bred at in 2004. And to this day, that nest still has breeding birds there. So that was a really unusual and quite exciting development. And I'll just show you here, this is what the population increase has been like over the last 20 years since the Rutland translocation occurred. So you can see that population at Rutland is really developing, and we've also got that Welsh population establishing now. But you'll notice that none of those individuals dispersed anywhere south from where those two populations are. And you can see actually that across most of Southern Europe, the story is very similar. There are populations, but they're quite isolated, and they are, yes, they haven't recolonized much of the area where they should be breeding. So there's some conservation interventions that we've been trying, and many others have been trying to help with that. And Paul's going to talk you through some of those now.
So yeah, about 11 years ago, I was working over at RSPBR. Now, Poole Harbour is just phenomenal for ospreys. And as the population started increasing in Scotland and then building in the Midlands and in Wales, we started seeing more ospreys using Poole Harbour. I mean, its location is perfect. It's slap bang in the middle of the south coast. So any birds having arrived from mainland Europe or having travelled up the west coast of France on their spring migration, many stop off in the harbour for a quick fish, quick feed, and then carry on north. And the same happens in the autumn, but obviously more birds are coming through because the youngsters are there. And, you know, during an August or early September period nowadays, we can have, I don't know, 10, 12 ospreys, you know, over a couple of days period of birds migrating through. So one of the ideas, one of the concepts was, well, let's get some nest platforms up around the harbour. And this is RSPB footage and photos. And the original concept was, well, let's get some fake birds up on some platforms and, you know, see if we can trick ospreys into thinking that other ospreys are already nesting here. Now, this in theory could work because ospreys are semi-colonial. They really, really like nesting where other ospreys are nesting too in the general area. So there was an outside chance that, you know, that could work. So the platforms were built. Fake birds were put up on the platforms. They even went to the extent of flicking white paint around the edges of the nests to make it look like young had been excreting, so that any migrant ospreys looking down and think, oh, there's, you know, they've been successful. There's other ospreys here, and it was a nice idea. Anyway, those birds stayed up on the platforms for several years, and actually we did have interest. We did have migrant birds coming in and settling, but none were over summering, and certainly none were breeding. But we were really interested in the increase in number of ospreys using the harbour. And what we wanted to try and learn was, where were they hunting? What were they feeding on? What were the peak times? You know, what were the age ratios, the sex ratios, all that kind of stuff. And it was completely by chance, actually, and one of those kind of lovely coincidences, that my old science teacher from high school was also Brittany's science teacher, actually at a different school. And me and my science teacher kept in touch, and he contacted me one day and he just said, I've got this student called Brittany, and she's just done this lovely piece of work about osprey recolonization across the UK. And he said, you're interested in ospreys, aren't you? And I said, yeah, too right. And he goes, yeah, have a look at this report she's just written. So I read it and I was blown away. So I contacted Brittany. I said, look, there's a piece of kind of, you know, just individual research. Would you be interested in looking at and analysing for us, you know, some of this osprey behaviour that's going on across the harbour? And so, yeah, in autumn 2015, Brittany very kindly, in her spare time, was analysing data that she was getting herself, but also collecting from other people, and put together a really nice piece of work, you know, confirming you know, just how much Poole Harbour was being used by migrant ospreys. And this was actually before any talk of a translocation was going to take place. It was just pure coincidence. But anyway, as a result of that piece of work, we were talking to Jason Fathers from Wildlife Windows, who'd heard on the grapevine that there was potentially talk of a translocation being discussed for the South Coast somewhere, and that Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation would be interested in talking with us and a few other sites along the South Coast, actually. But anyway, so we started speaking, and it became very clear very quickly that we're all on the same page. We had a really strong attitude, right? Look, we can get this done. This is, you know, this is going to happen. So we spent, was it a year?
Yeah, it was quick.
Yeah, we basically put a whole feasibility study together very quickly in partnership with Natural England, kind of worked through it with them, and submitted it. And we were very lucky, actually, in as much that it was February, wasn't it, 2017. We got the green light and the thumbs up saying, yes, UK, this is all good, let's go ahead with this. And we thought, well, do we wait a year? You know, this is March now, 2017. Like, do we wait until the following spring to do it? We thought, no, we'll just do it. Let's just crack on. We've got the licenses, let's go. And so, yeah, we really went for it, and we found a location to do the first release. We got everything installed. We got everything we needed to get going that summer, and it's fantastic. We hit the ground running. So what's important in all of this is understanding the process and how it works and why we do it this way. Also, I'm warning over the next kind of hour or so, you'll see lots and lots of pictures of ospreys, and there'll be lots of dates and lots of different leg ring numbers and all this kind of stuff. But they are an important part of the story. But yeah, there's going to be lots of numbers and dates. So the first year we collected just 8 birds, and I say we, the royal we. It was Roy and his team up in Scotland, and they were ring numbers LS0 to LS7. Now once it transpired that the fake ospreys on the nest wasn't going to work, the next logical step was, okay, well, let's do a translocation. Now, the science behind a translocation is that certainly male ospreys, this relates to, is they always want to try and nest where they themselves were raised as a chick within that geographical area. Now, the average rate of expansion of an osprey population is about 4 kilometers per year, so it's very slow. So the males are constantly going back to their natal sites, trying to look up and find sites where they can breed there themselves. So the science behind the project is that you collect chicks at about 6 to 8 weeks old, under license from Scottish Natural Heritage, and they're collected before they've had time to imprint on Scotland as home, okay? What we have then down here in Poole Harbour, they're travelled overnight in the dark when it's cooler in a van and brought to our team down here. And these are big hacking cages, and they get put into these pens. Now, for the project to work, they have to have almost zero contact with humans throughout the whole process. So other than when they're collected from the nest, they have zero contact with humans pretty much. Basically, the way it's done up in Scotland is they're collected so it has no negative impact on the population up in Scotland. So what we're actually doing is collecting 1, sometimes 2, of the healthiest chicks from selected nests where we know the population's doing well in Scotland. And what that actually does is if there is a weaker bird in that nest, you know, sometimes there's birds that aren't getting as much food, by taking the eldest away, that kind of runt, I suppose you could call it, then starts getting fed more, and actually it can increase productivity, which is a nice way of looking at it. They're brought down to our team here in Poole Harbour, and it's then our job to get them in the pens as fast as possible and just start feeding them. Now, we don't really want them in the pens for that long. You know, the shorter we can have them in there, the better. We want them out flying around. But we're monitoring them constantly, and we have CCTV set up in all of the pens. You can just see on the back of each, there's little hatches basically, and we have plates of fish. We're chopping up and prepping food, what seems like forever, every day for that whole period. And we're going down 3 times a day, opening up a little hatch in the back of the pen, sliding a little plate of food in, closing the hatch up again and retreating. And we've got a monitoring room that we have a team that are monitoring the behavior. So we're monitoring everything from wing flapping, how many pieces of fish have they eaten, when do they start going up onto the perching bars, interactions with each other, are they getting on? A really detailed account of everything each bird is doing during that time that they're in the pens. And it's lovely to watch because you're watching their progress. So here on the left, you've got a couple of the birds. You can just see there's a nest replica on the left-hand side there. And then there's that perching bar at the front, which they kind of spend a bit of time, you know, several days looking at before then they build up the courage and they build up their strength in their wing muscles to then make it onto the perching bar. And sometimes they do stupid stuff like climbing onto their food bowls and sitting in the food. But it's a real privilege to be able to kind of host this part of the project, because actually the latter bit is the most stressful part. This bit, when they're in the pens, is quite kind of relaxing, isn't it?
Maybe for you, I don't know.
No, it's a nice, you know, to be able to watch them and monitor them and see them grow is yeah, really lovely. But then they're only in the pens for a couple of weeks, kind of 2 to 3 weeks. And we know when they're ready to go because they move from that nest that you just saw in the previous slide up onto this perching bar. And when they've been on that perching bar for about, probably about 4 days, you know, they're ready to go because they'll just move to the nest to go get some more food and then go straight back to those perching bars. And obviously we need them as ready as possible for when we open that front of the pen. You know, they need to be strong, they need to be ready, and we need to know that they're able to fly. So we're monitoring them constantly at this stage to see how strong they are and how long they're spending on those perching bars. But there's one very important thing we need to do before we release the birds, is we go in the day or 2 days before and we mount each of them with a little radio transmitter. Because post-release, once we've opened that front door of the pen, the project isn't over. That isn't our work done. In fact, the most stressful part of the project then begins, because it's our job to keep those birds within that general area for as long as possible until natural instincts kick in and they migrate. So what happens in the wild is, even when they fledge the nest, once the young have left the nest, you know, while they're in the nest, the parents are bringing in food, the male's bringing in food, female's bringing in food. When they leave the nest, the parents are still bringing in food, and they don't actually ever get taught how to catch a fish. They're still completely reliant on the parents. So once we've released the birds, we need to know where they are all the times. And so these little radio transmitters allow us to keep a track on the birds as they're flying around, as they're kind of mapping out. And this is, like I said, this is the crucial time now, because when we release them, they are mapping out Poole Harbour as home. This is where they think home is, or this is where they're teaching themselves as to where home is. So that when they return in 2 years' time, or when they hopefully return in 2 years' time, they come back to Poole Harbour rather than going back to Scotland. And the release phase is quite nerve-wracking. So what we do is we don't do it in the middle of the day. We go down the night before, and out in front of the pens, we've got these big 4 nests, and we put in the dark so the birds can't see us. We put lots of fish on these nests out in front of the pens. We do it in the pitch black. Then about 3 o'clock in the morning, very, very quietly and very, very slowly, from behind the pen so they can't see us, we very gently, without trying to make a sound, lower the front of the pens, so that when when the sun comes up that morning, there's nothing stopping them from going. And then it's either a very long wait, sometimes several hours before some of the birds move off, or some of them actually go pretty quickly. And it's then down to our team to make sure we're then tracking them using the radio transmitters so that we know where they are. And you can see the feeding nests on these photos here, and some of them sat on perching bars. We've got perching bars on top of the pens there. And we're down to the monitoring phase. And this is crucial. This is where the monitoring really, really ramps up. So we're doing many what are called Yagi checks. So on the left, that photo there, Liv's holding a Yagi, and that's the receiver that picks up the radio signal from the tags. And we also do visual monitoring as well. And it's our job to make sure that each of the birds are coming into the feeding nests every single day. Obviously, they want to leave on migration in as best condition as possible. They want to be as fat as possible. They want to be as, as pristine as possible before they naturally leave. But yeah, it's pretty full on. But this is where the beginning of a really interesting story starts, and I'll pass over to Brittany in a second. But this is our first year. So in 2017, we released 8 birds. And I told you that, lots of other birds are passing through on migration. And they're semi-colonial, so ospreys like nesting where other ospreys are nesting. Anyway, we were doing one of our morning checks, and we were scoping and looking at the birds. And like I said, we released 8 that year, and we were counting them. We were like, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We had 9 birds at our release site. And we had Tim McCrill there, who many of you will know is kind of Mr. Osprey, and he ran the Osprey project at Rutland for many years and is now working for the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. Anyway, we were trying to get a fix on this extra osprey, and we could see that it had a blue ring on the right leg, which means it's an English or a Welsh bird from a wild nest elsewhere. And anyway, Tim was looking through his telescope and he goes, bloody hell, I ring that bird. And it happened to be a bird called CJ7. So she was in the UK for the first time, having migrated away from Rutland. So she's from a wild nest up at Rutland Water. She hatched in 2015. And this was her first time she'd ever been seen back in the UK, having left Rutland in 2015. And she spent several days really associating with our chicks, kind of feeding with them, interacting with them. And this is where the story begins, because her bond with Poole Harbour began at this very moment. Because she now thinks, or at that period then, she then thinks other not ospreys are nesting here. And so her maternal instinct kicked in, was like, wow, this is a really good place. There are young ospreys here. I might come back. Anyway, that winter, to be honest, we didn't really think too much about CJ7 because lots of other ospreys were passing through at the same time. So it was nice that she interacted with the chicks, but we didn't really think too much of it. Anyway, that winter, amazingly, we had 3 birds seen, photographed down in West Africa. So we had LS7 that was seen in Senegal. We had another bird called LS3 that was seen in Senegal. And it was really lovely because we even got a photo sent to us by one of the wardens down there. And you can clearly see it said LS3. And that's what you want, because sadly, the survival rate for all ospreys, not translocated birds, but for all wild ospreys migrating from their breeding grounds down to their wintering grounds, the survival rate is only 30 to 40%. Their migrations are really, really dangerous. They're having to compete with bad weather conditions. They're having to compete with the Sahara Desert. They're having to compete with illegal hunting. They're having to compete with teaching themselves to fish and sometimes drowning. So when you get records of birds coming back or having made it to Africa, that's a big, big thumbs up. It's like, wow, okay, right, there's a chance something might happen. And then we had another bird that winter, LS6, that was seen down in the Gambia. But very sadly, and this highlights the issues that they face down in Africa, you can see in this photo, this was taken in the Gambia, and you can see its tail's missing, which means it's obviously had a run-in with a local something. And then a few days after this photo was taken, sadly, LS6 was found predated, we think either by a crocodile or a jackal of sorts. So sadly, LS6 was one of the birds that went into those statistics of sadly not making it. And then we roll on to 2018.
So we went into 2018 feeling really quite chuffed with ourselves. We had three out of 8 birds making it to West Africa is really quite impressive. And considering we hadn't expected to hear about any of them, we were sort of buoyant from the success of the previous season. The first interesting thing that happened was we definitely noticed an increase in the number of adult birds using the harbour that spring and passing through on migration. So that bird on the left, that's S1, that's another Rutland bird, the same age as CJ7, but that one's male. And he had also been seen in the harbour in the autumn when we first released those chicks in 2017. And he was seen back here quite early in the season. I think it was very early in April. And we got quite excited and thought maybe he's going to stick around. Maybe he might entice in a female. Who knows what's going to happen? Within a few days, he was back up at Rutland on a territory and he'd nearly attracted in another female. So it just goes to demonstrate that the males are really, really site faithful. The other bird there, AX8, that's a Scottish female that we've seen returning several years recently. Again, that bird just passed through quite quickly. And then I think it was in May, CJ7 turned up, and this was quite a change from compared to the other birds. We think she stuck around pretty much all summer that year. She definitely interacted with the chicks that year, but she sort of became our first semi-resident bird. And we started off the translocation. I was very fortunate in 2018 that I got to go up to Scotland to help collect the chicks. That year we increased the number significantly, so we did 14 chicks, which compared to 8, it doesn't sound like much of a difference, but in terms of keeping track of them, it really does change the game a bit. So we had to add on 2 extra pens. We also upgraded and we got a slightly more stable ladder up onto the back of the pens. But yeah, I was very fortunate that I got to go up and help collect the chicks up in Scotland. So you can see there's Roy Dennis and Tim McCrill, who we've already mentioned, and then Emily Jarcham of the Little Owl Project was also helping care for the chicks up there. And the bird on the very right hand side there is 014. She was one of the chicks that we took. Her sister got left behind in Scotland, and we had 14 chicks, ring 001 up to 014. I say I was very fortunate. It was lovely being up there. The drive down wasn't quite so pleasant because you have to do it all in one go. You want to make that experience as short as possible for the birds. But we got them down to Poole Harbour and into the pens, and they seemed very content for the most part. We thought, well, we know what we're doing now. Let's just get a crack on like we did the previous year. And we did. We just completely repeated our process of the previous year. This picture was taken by Emir Evans, who some of you might know is from the Mighty Osprey project of 014 there. They came and visited, as did we have a few other people as well come to see the birds. And the birds were progressing quite well. And when it came, I'll show you a little video of what we were talking about earlier. This is 014 and 013, her pen mate, learning to flap. So that's that wing strengthening behaviour that Paul was talking about before. That's them really starting to develop those flight muscles, and after a few days of that they will be up on those perches. And when they were, we started tagging the birds, but we noticed quite quickly that some of the birds were not reacting to human presence in the correct way or the expected way when we got to that tagging stage. So we didn't tag all of the birds, we just tagged the eldest ones and released them. And when it became apparent that the other birds were not improving, we took them to the Cotswold Wildlife Park, where we worked closely with the vets there to try and work out what was wrong with the birds and also to hopefully bring them back to health. But sadly, we lost several birds that year to what was essentially to us at the time a mystery illness. We considered lead poisoning, we considered the food, the heat, and it seems that actually, besides lead poisoning, it was a mixture of things. So I don't know how many people remember the summer of 2018, but it was exceptionally hot. This means that the food dries out and they get all their nutrients they need from fish, including all the water. So this might have had an impact. And it seems to be that those youngest birds, the ones that died were the younger birds. It seems that they were at such a crucial stage in their development that when the detrimental effects of that year took hold, so the heat and potentially not getting what they need from the food, sadly, it was such a crucial period for them that it meant that they couldn't survive. So that was absolutely devastating for us and really heartbreaking to not be able to do anything about it despite our best efforts. And, you know, this is a tried and tested method. By this point, they've tried it elsewhere in Europe. It's been done in the States. That's what it's like working in conservation. Just sometimes you never know what's going to happen. And our partners at the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation were as shocked and heartbroken as we were. We did get 6 really strong birds out and off on migration that year. And they were 3 females and 3 males. And they were just stunning birds. So one of those was 014, who you see in the middle there, and that's another female 008. And they were just incredibly, incredibly strong. There was one chick called 002 who was a little bit borderline, but he actually ended up staying until the 23rd of September, which is relatively late for the chicks. Most of them leave early September, late August. But by the time he left, he could swoop down to the feeding nests and pick up a piece of fish in a single movement. He didn't even have to touch down and land. So that's a mark of a really, really strong bird. So he's one we'd always hope to see maybe back in sometime in the future. They also encountered the migrant birds again. So this was one of the chicks trying to steal a fish off of a migrant bird. This is one of the artificial nests in the harbour. That's down at Middlebury at the RSPB Reserve. And we also had CJ7 still around. And like I said, we think she definitely interacted with the chicks again, still reinforcing to her that there's breeding ospreys here. And we were very interested to see what she might do the coming season.
So roll on 2019. So this is always going to be an important and interesting year for us because ospreys don't return for 2 years. Okay, so they go down into their wintering grounds, and there's no need for them to return the following year because they're not sexually mature or not ready to set a territory up. So it's not until 2 years later that you expect to see some of your first birds coming back. They arrive later in the spring. So breeding ospreys power through mostly through late March and April, and then through May and June is when you start getting the 2-year-old ospreys coming back. You know, they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know where they're going. All they know is they want to go back to their natal sites quickly, have a little look around, and then they basically spend the rest of the summer not doing a great deal before then going back to their natal sites later in the autumn, just have another little look around and they move on. So 2019 was the season that we were expecting or hoping to see maybe 1 or 2 of our birds from the first year come back. So to plan for that, on all the nest platforms that we've set up around the harbour, we put these trail cameras on, motion sensitive cameras, and these are great. These have been a real game changer for us because they're motion sensitive cameras that run on the phone network. So there's SIM cards in there, and basically we've got little apps on our phones, and every time they're triggered we get an update every 2 hours, and it sends the photos through to our phones, so we don't have to go and retrieve the memory cards or do any of that stuff. We get the data every 2 hours to see who's been landing on the nests, and we get lots of people landing on the nests. We get Egyptian geese landing on the nests, we get starlings landing on the nests, and we get kestrels landing on the nests. But what was amazing in 2019 was on the 1st of April, CJ7 landed on one of our nest platforms. Now, this is a bird that is showing intent, okay? Any birds that arrive that early in the spring, they want to breed. So this was suggesting to us that CJ7 had been so impressed with seeing the chicks in 2018 and 2017 in Poole Harbour that she was now thinking, brilliant, this is somewhere where I want to be. And she spent several weeks on a nest platform in the harbour, bringing sticks to there. And this is behaviour that hadn't been seen in southern Britain for 200 years. So this was really special. We were thinking, wow, this is, exciting times. And she spent days calling out, and there were migrants passing through, but none stopped because they're so fixated on getting back to their own breeding grounds further north. So it looked like we were having to wait for one of our birds to arrive before she, found a mate. We had other birds passing through. So this was a Scottish bird, landed on another nest platform, PA1. CJ7 soon saw her off. And then actually, interestingly, PA1 2 days later was then seen up at the Dovey Osprey nest. So it just shows, how quickly these birds are passing through. And then this beast turned up and actually saw CJ7 off. So I stupidly on social media one day just referred to this osprey as Beaky, didn't give it a second thought. And sadly, that name is now stuck. Poor bird. But anyway, she's really interesting. She turned up later in April of 2019 and got really territorial on that nest and kicked CJ7 off. Then she disappeared. But then actually later in 2019, she came back again. And each spring since 2019, Beaky has turned up and become very territorial on that nest, but then disappears. And we don't know where she goes. She's unringed. We don't know where she's from. But then on the 12th of June, this was a very magical moment, actually, because this is the kind of moment the project was waiting for. We got this photo from one of our trail cameras. Now, that was the quality of the photo. And you can see, actually, you can't really see what that leg ring number says. but the fact that there's 2 birds on a nest in the harbour is exciting enough. And so anyway, I was hosting a talk to a group of people, and I was just like, and my phone pinged, and as a joke I said, oh, I wonder if this is one of our birds back, and looked at my phone and saw that there was 2 ospreys on a nest. I was like, oh my God, I think there might be one of our birds back. So dashed over to where this nest is, looked for the bird, couldn't see it anywhere, and spent all day looking for this extra bird, or this new bird that was in the harbour, and eventually managed to pin it down. And we could see that it was a male, which was a really exciting time. So that means obviously it's not CJ7, who's a female. And I couldn't read the ring number. We couldn't get in a position to read the ring number. And eventually, after about 9 hours of trying, we managed to find it again, read the ring number, and it said LS7. And that's one of our birds from the first year of the project. And what was really interesting is within, moments of him arriving into the harbour on the 12th of June, CJ7 had pounced on him, led him to a nest in the harbour, and they paired up really quickly from the 12th of June. And they spent the whole of 2019 together, forming a bond. They kind of attempted mating a few times. They brought a few sticks to the nest, but we thought, this is great. This is really looking fantastic. There was no way they were ever going to breed because, it was just too late in the season, but they were forming that bond, familiarizing themselves with the harbour, and it was all looking really, really good. So that was in the early part of the summer. And then obviously we still had the translocation of that year to do in year 3. So because of obviously the sad losses we'd made, we'd had the year before, we made some big changes for 2019. We changed sites. We had a new pen design, got some new fish, we got more staff. And the most crucial thing is actually we collected the birds a week and a bit later than we'd collected before. And that meant that having older, stronger birds completely changed the dynamics of how they behaved in the pens. And that was the biggest game changer, is having older birds for that year. So in 2019, we had birds ring numbered 015 to 025. And it was lovely. It was like I say, we changed the pen design so that there was gaps down the centers of the pen, so air could flow through much easier. The pens were slightly bigger. And yeah, it was great. They all did really well. And the funniest thing was when we'd had the birds in 2017 and 2018, when we put them in the pens, it took about a week for them to want to get up onto these perching bars at the front of the pen. I'd say half of the birds in that year, or a few of them certainly, within an hour or two of us putting them in the pens, were already trying to get up onto the perching bars. So they were much bigger, much stronger, and adapted to being in the pens really, really well. And then came the time for release, and they all, released okay, no problems there. It was fine, and they all found little spots that they really liked to sit, and the monitoring continued. And here's a nice bit of footage. So like the same process, we were going out every night, putting fish on these nesting platforms to keep the birds in the area. And there's a nice bit of footage of 022 on the left and 025, is it? On the right-hand side. And like I said, these are images taken from our CCTV that we have set up on the pens. But who should turn up? CJ7. She found the new release site and started bringing LS7 there as well, which was quite funny. And we were even capturing them on other nest platforms, feeding on fish that they'd nicked from our release site. So they weren't going to the harbour to go and catch fish. They were stealing fish from our release site and then going to other nests to go and eat it. But again, it was just building that bond. She was just like, okay, there's more chicks here. Then, giving her more reason to want to nest. And it's about this time we start doing our osprey cruises. So from from August 20th, we take people out to go and see migrant ospreys through the harbour, because also that later part of August is when our youngsters are starting to explore quite far. So, we do start seeing them at different parts of the harbour. And it was amazing because on what date was that?
1st of September.
1st of September, yeah. We did a boat 1st of September 2019. And this bird, a lovely photo taken by a local photographer called Mark Wright, This bird, 022, flew straight past the boat. Mark got a lovely photo, and that was the last time that bird was seen in the UK. That photo was the last time it was seen. And it had migrated. So basically this photo was of it leaving the harbour on migration. And obviously we don't know if we're ever going to see these birds again. So, you know, we were really grateful that Mark gave us the photo and said, oh, I've got a nice photo of 022. And yeah, we didn't think much of it. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the harbour, LS7 and CJ7 were still kind of building a bond, you know, and we were thinking, brilliant, we're kind of ahead of schedule, because next year in 2020, you know, there's a really good chance we're going to have successful breeding attempts, and we were all on tenterhooks for that following year. In the winter of 2019, we had another bird seen in the Gambia, 019, a female. She was seen and photographed, reported by Chris Wood and Joanna Daly, and they sent us some lovely photos of 019 down in the Gambia. And again, we've got another bird in the Gambia, which is good. We were really, really positive. Roll on 2020.
So given that we'd seen mating attempts on the nest, we were very, very keen to set up something a bit more high-tech than the camera traps on CJ7 and LS7's favourite nest. So we've crowdfunded for a live stream camera, and very generously our goal was met, and we had that installed that winter. So we had very high hopes, you know, is CJ7 gonna stick to her normal date, her date from the previous year of the 1st of April? She was a day late, we'll allow her that. And she actually turned up on one of the other nests, first of all that year. And actually it took her a week to go back to the live stream nest. So she visited a couple of other nests in the harbour. And then on the 8th of April, we got this footage early in the morning. And that's her arriving on the nest. And within a few hours, she was doing this. So adding nesting material, and probably my favourite behaviour that they do, this is egg cup scraping. So she's making a hollow in the middle of the nest for where she might lay eggs. So she's very, very keen at this point. And, you know, we could not believe it when we had this activity going on. It was just astounding for people to be able to be watching this live. Again, like Paul said before, this is the first time this behaviour has been seen in southern Britain for centuries. She became a bit of a celebrity for all this behaviour that she was doing. So she was on the Self-Isolating Bird Club with Chris Pack and Megan McCubbin, and people came to love her. And you remember, this was April last year, so this was a really tough time for many people. So people have come to us ever since then and said, she got me through the lockdown. She was there, you know, we watched her every morning at breakfast. She was a real distraction from the world around. And we all felt that as well. And she, you know, she really did help get lots of people through last year. She did have a few encounters. So this is an unringed male. Again, we don't know where this bird has come from, but this bird visited the other nest that she'd been on previously. But this was the only picture we got of them. So it was clearly just a bird passing through. And then she was sort of waiting for a very long time. And we kept on telling ourselves, well, just give it another week. And then eventually it became clear that LS7 wasn't coming back. And when we looked back on the conditions during late March, early April that year, it became clear why. So this is the 30th of March 2020. This is the winds up in northwestern Europe, and you can see it's just persistent northeasterly winds blowing out into the Atlantic. If an osprey is bold and it tries to migrate across the Bay of Biscay between Spain and France, that bird is likely to be pushed out into the Atlantic, sadly, and probably won't make landfall again. And we think that that's what happened to not only LS7, but lots of breeding individuals last year. So the Welsh population lost 3 of its adult males. That's 30% of their population, roughly. So that's a huge loss. And the same was true up in Scotland. So the productivity was much lower than normal. And actually, not only did it mean that we didn't have breeding pair, but it meant that there weren't enough chicks to go ahead with our translocation. So we couldn't go ahead, not for the reasons you might think, not because of the pandemic, but because there weren't enough chicks to take from Scotland that would leave a healthy, sustainable population in Scotland. Fortunately, CJ7 kept us entertained, and on the 30th of April, she laid her first unfertilised egg. And this is something that's been very rarely recorded, particularly in the UK in breeding ospreys, because it's very unusual to have a female on a live stream nest on her own. We were certain these eggs were unfertilized, and actually it seems she was as well, because she laid 3 more, but fortunately she didn't waste any of her own energy incubating them. It just went to show how well she was tied to that nest and how good a breeding condition she was in. She did leave them unattended, and it did get a bit of interest from other species. This tawny owl was having a look in, but surprisingly none of them got taken, and eventually she did just bury them into the centre of the nest. That's probably just natural behaviour, keeping the nest tidy. She did have a visit. This is a Scottish bird. This is PT0, and actually our colleague Liv worked at the Loch of the Loughs when this bird was a chick up there. She stayed around for a couple of days, but again, she left and probably went up to Scotland. I can't blame her, because CJ7 wasn't particularly friendly. And so we kind of thought, well, that's all the excitement done for the season. But then we got a call from the Dovey Osprey Project in West Wales, and they told us that 014 was on their nest visiting. So you can see the incubating female there. She's got eggs. This was a really incredible result for us, our first female returning. And obviously it's not Poole Harbour, but it's really encouraging, because this is one of the key aims of the translocation project. It's not just to establish a population here, it's to link up those populations that are in disconnected places, and that's the role of the females. The males go to those natal sites, they return to their natal sites. The females act as the genetic connectors between populations. So this was fantastic to see her there. We wondered what she'd do. It's very common for 2-year-old birds to wander, and indeed she did. She went up to Anglesey and she met one of the Dovey chicks who was the same age as her, who had also returned up there. Then she visited the Lyn Cwedoch nest, which was amazing because there were chicks there, and obviously the female was very protective, so she didn't stick around for very long. And then she turned up on the Axe estuary in Devon, and several people got some fantastic photographs of her, including this one from Phil Roberts of her with a double catch. That's a good bird if they can catch 2 fish at a time. And we thought she was coming home. You know, I said within a week she'll be back in Poole Harbour. But it wasn't to be. She went straight back up to Dovey, and this time she turned up with 2 different young bachelors in tow. These 2 males that are the same age as her. So we were pretty sure that in future years she wasn't going to come back to Poole Harbour. She's now encountered at least 3 potential suitors for future years. But like I said, that's really a really positive result for us. Back in Poole Harbour, things were quiet on the nest, but we did have some interesting activity from nightjars. This almost looked like a mating attempt there, but that just goes to show that CJ7 wasn't using the nest so much until sort of the end of August, when she started to show an interest again. And that's her bringing back a live fish to the nest. And she started nest arranging again as well. She also had an encounter with an unringed male. This was the last day she was seen before she left on migration. This could have potentially been that bird that she'd encountered back in the spring. We just don't know. But it's encouraging to see other birds using the nests again. One of the really interesting things we've noticed the last 2 winters has been the use of urban sites by younger birds. So this is Holes Bay, which is only around 2 kilometres away from the centre of Poole Town. And every autumn, in October, we've had birds returning to that, coming and visiting this site. It's generally juveniles, and it's probably just because it's a nice easy hunting ground and they don't have such a natural aversion to people as the adults do. But that was really fantastic to see. And over the winter, CJ7 was immortalised in wire by wildlife artist Paul Green, and this is in our local performing arts centre, the Lighthouse. So she's really made quite a big impact on the community here.
So roll on, this year, and obviously we don't really know what's going to happen or how things are going to pan out. But what was nice is that in the early part of the year, 019, the female that had been seen down in the Gambia kind of November time last year, she was seen again in March this year. So it showed that she'd survived the winter and that there was a chance that she was going to be back this spring. So that was really nice. But we hadn't had any reports of any of our other birds down in Africa. I mean, it is a bit of a needle in a haystack situation. You know, you're not always going to get information of birds. You're lucky if you do, basically. But you know, reports of 019 being seen again was good news. this was the nest cam in the early part of the season, so we thought we'd do a bit of a job and clean it up for any returning birds, especially CJ7. Stock dove obviously liked it quite a lot, and we were gearing ourselves up for an exciting year for 2021, just to see what was gonna happen. And just like clockwork, CJ7 arrived again on the 1st of April. I mean, it's amazing how they do that every year. 1st of April, then the 2nd of April, then 1st of April, just magic. So yeah, it was unknown as to how the spring was going to pan out. Obviously, LS7 wasn't going to be around, but we were expecting some more birds. So birds that we released in 2019 were now due back this year, this spring. So anyway, she got straight back down to it and started nest building and replicating all the behaviours she'd done last year. So things were looking really positive. We did an event earlier this spring called the Reintroduction and Rewilding Summit, and she was a lovely star on there. We were talking about reintroductions as a whole, and we cut live to the nest, and she was on the nest, which was great. But at that point, there was still no suitors for her. None of our birds had come back yet. We did have a bird called 3AX, which is from
Rutland.
Rutland,
just like CJ7.
But see, again, CJ7 saw her off pretty quickly. And then it was, I mean, the really interesting thing about osprey migration this spring, so, having just over the last few months, it was really intense for about a 3-week period. So from the end of March into mid-April, we had big numbers of ospreys passing through the harbour on migration. Every day we were having, maximum 3, sometimes 4 birds in the area. So CJ7 was engaging and interacting with a lot of ospreys. I mean, we were watching her from different viewpoints, pursuing ospreys around the Wareham Channel. We don't know if she was, flirting with them or seeing them off. But then it got to mid-April, and it was like someone turned a tap off. It just went really quiet. So what had happened is that the conditions on migration have been so good from March to mid-April that all of them just passed through in kind of one big chunk. And then from mid-April to mid-May, we had no other ospreys in the harbour apart from CJ7, and she was just on the nest on her own, looking a bit glum. And she went through the same process. So when was this? This was the 27th of April this spring. She laid another egg. And this time, she laid 7 in total, which is pretty incredible. But this time, they were predated. Ravens came in and took them. But it was fine. She, that's natural. And she wasn't looking after them in any way. But what was lovely, the piece of news that we did get was 014, our female that had turned up in Wales last spring, did go back to Wales, as we kind of thought she would. She paired up with a bird called Z2 on a nest. And as far as we know at the moment, we haven't had an update, but she has been incubating eggs for the last month or so. So actually, we have had breeding success with our project, just not in Poole Harbour. We're kind of building the Welsh population at the moment. But it's fine. Like Brittany said, it's kind of interlinking all of these populations is what this project is all about. So that was really great news that 014 was nesting up in Wales. It was fantastic. Laid her eggs on the 5th of May. But then something really cool happened. So on the 17th of May this spring, so not that long ago really, an osprey was seen at Ventnor on the Isle of Wight, and then seen at Hengistbury Head. And then about, I think it was in the evening on the 17th of May, an osprey was seen leaving Hengistbury, heading west. We thought, oh, that's interesting. We didn't think too much of it. Anyway, the next morning, we got this photo, and we were like, bloody hell, it's one of our birds is back. And we could see that it was a male, and we could clearly see the ring number. It was 022. And we were like, excellent, another one of our birds is back. And within seconds, CJ7 found him. It's just amazing. She's on the patrol constantly, and they've been inseparable since. So this is the 18th of May. He turned up, and they were figuring each other out on this particular nest platform for a while, but then this was amazing. So this is the first time 022 landed on our nest cam. And CJ7 had drawn him there. She'd caught a fish and flew to the nest basically to say, look, this is where I'm interested in. Come and join me. And he did. He came down, settled on the nest, and they bonded straight away. And when I say bonded, so she was calling a lot, and they started mating. So this is really strange behaviour for a 2-year-old male. We weren't expecting this at all. So what 2-year-old birds tend to do is they turn up at their natal sites, have a bit of a look around, and then they disappear for the summer. They'll go to different counties, looking at different water bodies, sometimes even go to different countries, and not do a great deal. And then they'll go back to their natal sites later in the autumn to have a bit of a look around. But he turned up, and CJ7 and 022 have been inseparable ever since, to the point. So that was a really magical moment. We were on the Self-Isolating Bird Club giving an update on, how we were doing with the birds. And we cut live to the nest, and CJ7 had just landed on the nest. And yeah, we got mating. It was fantastic. But then we got another piece of news on Saturday just gone, so only a couple of days ago, that 019, so this female that had been seen in Africa this winter and had been seen in March, suddenly turned up, guess where? In Wales. So this is on the Glaslyn nest. She spent a bit of time, only about 10 minutes or so, on the Glaslyn nest, and actually she hasn't been seen since, has she? Not yet. But that's great, because we've now got 022 back here in the harbour, and 019 and 014 up in Wales. And actually there's still plenty of time, because these 2-year-olds come back all the way through June and July, and sometimes don't even turn up until August. So we've still got the rest of the spring and the summer for some more of our 2019 birds to turn up. And this is great. Yeah, the setup at Dovey and Glaslyn is just fantastic. The cameras they've got are phenomenal. I mean, look at this. This is the footage they get of birds on their nests. This is what we kind of aspire to when we do finally get some ospreys nesting in the harbour. But yeah, it's just so great that we can monitor them in this detail these days. And 019 getting flushed off the nest, you can just miss it, but Tellin dives off and chases her off the nest.
So what's next? We've been through a lot today, but I think there's still a lot left to come. So originally we had 2 years left of the translocation, so we postponed the year, obviously, last year, so we had 2 years remaining. We've now been given permission for a 3rd year on top of that. So this summer we will be continuing with our 4th year of the translocation. We're really looking forward to getting back on with that again. Some of you might know that there's been a consultation recently for a reintroduction project in Suffolk as well. That's also something that Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation are working on. So it's an exciting time for ospreys in the UK. These are our predictions for the next 20 years. It's a bit farcical, but it demonstrates what we were saying earlier about the aims for our project. So we are hoping that obviously the population of Wales and Rutland are going to grow, but our own population is going to develop, and the birds will disperse along the south coast. We'll connect up those populations and create populations within the intervening space between those existing ones. And maybe, just maybe, some of our birds might go over to the continent, and we might get some birds from there, and the meta population of Europe will be a bit more cohesive thanks to our work. If you do want any more information about our project, please do go on our website, come to along to some of our other events. You can donate on the website as well. And these are all of our social media channels. So please do follow us, because I really do feel like our story's only just beginning, isn't it? Yeah, we do. Actually, we have got another update, which is just kind of panning out over the course of today. So 022, our male that's been with CJ7 for the last 3 weeks, has suddenly disappeared. Now, it's nothing to worry about. But what we think has happened is one of our surveyors was actually out in the harbour in a different place yesterday and had an osprey leaving Poole Harbour. And then in North Dorset today, an osprey was seen catching a fish at fishing lakes. And actually what we think has happened is that now 022 realises that this isn't going to be a breeding season for him. He is now off doing what normal 2-year-old ospreys do. So what we're thinking he'll probably do is go and spend, I don't know, maybe a few days, maybe even a few weeks
touring around doing what 2-year-old ospreys normally do, and will probably come back to the nest. I mean, he's got CJ7 on a nest waiting for him, so he'll come back at some point. We just don't know when. So if anyone isn't seeing 022 at the moment, don't worry. He's probably just off doing a bit of a wander. But yeah, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. It has been a really exciting project to be involved in, and obviously locally there's lots of other stuff going on as well. This fits into a much broader environmentally driven regeneration scheme. That's, you've got beavers going on at the moment, you've got sea eagles, there's storks happening. So yeah, it's quite an exciting time to be on the south coast, because you've got all these really cool projects going on. I'll just finish off. I mean, there's often debate about reintroductions. Should you intervene? Should you be doing this? Is it just a vanity project? Ospreys will spread on their own accord. Well, to be honest, our view is that, and certainly my view is that, the reason they're not here in the first place is because of human persecution. And if we have the tools and the methods to re-establish them, then why not just get on and do it? People say, oh, but it's just vanity. It's gonna, it's only to enhance people's egos or the charity. It's not. You've got a group of people that care passionately. I'm not just talking about us, but anyone that's doing rewilding work or reintroduction work. They just want to see things better, because the truth is, environmentally, we're in a pretty crap place at the moment. We're seeing declines right across the country, right across the world, of a whole range of different species. And it's not that we're neglecting lesser spotted woodpeckers or wood warblers. There are other people doing fantastic work in trying to learn the declines of those species and are working hard to reverse those declines. But something like an osprey project or a seagull project, it captures people's imaginations. They work, they're proven, tested methods of re-establishing lost species. And it provides a bit of hope as well. You hear so much about all the doom and gloom with environmental work across the world. Well, actually, here's a nice example of how things can be made better. And people say, oh, the money could be spent better on other conservation projects. Well, actually, the truth is, £230 million a year gets spent on bird food, feeding some of the most common birds in the country. Actually doing an osprey project isn't that expensive. So it's all in context. And I just think that the more people that can be inspired by projects like this, then it's better for everybody. So yeah, thank you all very much. And we kind of look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Poole and Brittany. I'm going to do a round of applause, because that was incredible. Amazing talk. Do you know what? I'm amazed that Channel 4 haven't contacted you for some reality TV show thing, because that would be post-watershed kind of coverage, wouldn't it? Those interactions and relationships. It's just, I think one of our team members said it was like a soap opera. It was absolutely brilliant. It is. It's exactly what it is. It really is. It's amazing. We're running slightly over time, and so for those of you that are still here, and thank you so much for hanging on, we're going to do like 5 or 10 minutes of questions. If you're okay with that, just let us know in the chat. I'm going to kick off with the first one, because it really relates to your last comment about funding and investment in programs like this. Someone has asked, and let me just go back, Thomas Back has asked, how is this amazing project funded? So how do you kind of sustain a huge program like this?
Yeah, well, we've got a private donor who's very kindly, is excited about seeing ospreys returning as us, that has said, let's just get on and do it. So I think there's elements where, you do have to be a bit lucky and find people that are happy to fund this work, because it's certainly not funded by government at this stage. I do think eventually, though, that government will, certainly because they're doing the review of beaver reintroductions and how that should be mapped out across the UK. And I do think eventually, governments will be funding projects like this. But at the moment, it does seem that it's down to philanthropy and down to crowdfunding as well. Crowdfunding is a hugely effective way of funding projects like this. I know that the Suffolk Wildlife Trust, the Osprey project that they're looking to get set up, they've just set up a crowdfunding page to get that going. So
if I could just add to that, I think so we talked about the conflict. It seems like, why is this money spent on ospreys rather than other species? But I think actually with these private donations, we're accessing a whole new area of funding that otherwise wouldn't be available to conservation. So we're not really competing with other projects for that funding. It's a whole new area, and like Paul said, that's probably going to increase in the future as well. I think.
Yeah, I think yeah, you've got a really good point there. I mean, natural history has always progressed, hasn't it? Like that, when we go back 200 years ago to those Victorian, kind of collectors, they were, I mean, in those days, actually, they were kind of funded by proceeds from their slave plantations, and they had that spare time, didn't they, to go out and invest in traveling the world, or, like Darwin and people like that used to do. So we exist now in a society where we have philanthropic donors who are able to invest back into society, and this is just, this is their choice. So one of the questions that came in, actually, and this one might be for you, Brittany, that you brought up, a question from Oliver Allen. He asked, are there really no ospreys in Ireland? Because you showed the map, didn't you, about their distribution. He says it seemed to be the only country in Northern Europe where they weren't shown to appear on the map. So I was wondering if you could clear that up for us a little bit.
Yeah, no, that is accurate. And actually, it seems that persecution is responsible for the loss of most raptor species actually in Ireland. So there are discussions underway for a reintroduction of ospreys to Ireland. It might not be in the imminent future, but it hopefully will be soon. Again, they should be there. They were there historically, but they were wiped out from Ireland even earlier than they were from the rest of from the UK. So it's meant that it's very difficult for them to find accurate records historical records of ospreys actually breeding there, because it was long before records were even beginning to be taken in many cases. So, but yeah, no, that's not just the story for ospreys, that's many different birds of prey. And they've done the golden eagle reintroductions there successfully. So hopefully osprey will be back in Ireland, but no, that's true, they're not there currently.
Gosh, wow. And actually that leads on to my next question, which is from Brian Matthews and possibly to Paul. He asked he comments actually that a nest platform was cut down in Wales this year. So I don't know if you know about that.
Yeah.
What Brian is asking is that how secure are your locations? Are they very difficult to find, and are they protected from that kind of vandalism and willful damage?
I think the truth is, if someone wants to do damage to a nest, they will, no matter how much protection you've got. I mean, the nest that was cut down had a camera on it. So it's all about getting or taking the community, different areas of the community on that journey with you. One of the worries for a lot of people, certainly if you're reintroducing ospreys, is obviously they eat fish, and anyone that's got a fishing interest might take umbrage to that. Whether it's a fish farm or whether it's local fishermen. I mean, luckily our birds, all our data shows that they're pretty much 99% eating grey mullet, which isn't a high value or high fish species in Poole Harbour. But there's a lovely example of I've gone off his question slightly, but there's a lovely example of in Rutland where the ospreys were having an impact on a fish farm. The Rutland team got involved, and then they've turned an area of that fish farm into an osprey photography hide, and now they charge photographers to come and photograph ospreys fishing in the thing. But the site that we've got the nest cam on is a secure site. It's a private site. We very kindly got given some mobile security devices to monitor human activity around the site. We're working with the landowner there, who have also looked at improving camera setups for next year. You can only do so much, but like I said, it's all about making people understand who may have an issue as to why it's not an issue. It seems people get so scared about wildlife and how it's going to impact their life. And I can understand if it's having a huge impact on your income or your whatever it is you're trying to source, then absolutely it needs to be dealt with. But just resorting to killing and cutting down straight away without any other discussions, it's just crazy. There's always a way to figure this stuff out. We just need to be thinking a lot smarter. But we're doing a lot of work with schools locally. We're doing a lot of work with the local community locally. And yeah, hopefully, we hope that when it does happen, everyone will be as excited as we are.
I think you're talking about, I mean, you're on a similar kind of discussion level of the Urban Heaths Partnership that do the work with schools and young people about arson on the heaths. And it's about bringing those audiences on that journey with you to help them understand the value of that natural environment and the kind of the wildlife that exists within that space, and helping to understand how we benefit from each. Because actually what was really lovely that came out of your talk was one of the, you know, where you talked about the I can't remember what it was called, that stay-at-home bird club, what was it called, the lockdown
bird club.
That's it. And you talked about how people, the comments you were getting back was people were watching the webcam saying how much they look forward to it, because we were all locked in 4 walls and you had this opportunity to just be somewhere else and go on a journey. Really, I mean, that was the feedback you got. I mean, I thought that was extraordinary.
Yeah, it was lovely. And actually it ties back into that thing we mentioned at the beginning about the fact that people have been involved in the conservation of ospreys since the very beginning, and it's going to continue to be that way. And actually, on the topic of the Lynn Brennig nest, the nest that was cut down, recently we had a discussion with Roy Dennis about it, and we said, you know, how do you combat that? And he said, they're a minority and we're winning. Slowly but surely we are winning. You know, that kind of activity was much more common historically. It will phase out, but people are the key to that.
Yes, yeah, I agree. One other question, actually, just coming back to how you're looking after the chicks, actually. I've got a question from Tony and Sue Farley, who ask, what fish species were the young chicks actually fed? So we've talked about the low value Poole Harbour mullets, and Thomas Back said I bet they wouldn't feel like that if they'd feel a bit annoyed if they were called low value. I mean, I've never had one with fish and chips, by the way, let's just say that. I don't know how they taste, but what are you giving those young chicks to eat, to feed on, and nutritionally? And, you know, I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah, well, luckily we've got a supplier of fresh fish where we're able to get them fresh that morning.
Rick Stein's restaurant, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Best of the best.
No, we've basically got a local fish farm who are good as gold. You know, they're totally on board with the project, and they give us fish that were swimming around in the morning and not swimming around in the afternoon. So I mean, that's key to the bird's development, because the fish needs to be as fresh as if, you know, the parent has just delivered it to the nest for the chick. So the fact that we can have fresh trout for these young birds that were alive an hour or so before they get it is just perfect.
It is as close to the natural way of things as possible, because often the adults bring in fish that are still flapping to the nest. Personally, I don't like cutting up fish that are still flapping around, but we give them the next best thing.
Oh, but that's the best way, Brittany. That's the best way of getting those nutrients into children if they're still flapping for dinner time. Brian Matthews also has another question, actually, and when we're talking about, because obviously I'm going to say this up front, I'm not that au fait with what birds eat, but when we're talking about other species, and Brian Matthews is asking about white-tailed eagles, do the ospreys come into conflict with them, and especially when it comes to things like feeding and territory and things like that?
Yeah, well, do you know what? Really annoyingly, this morning I was out doing a red shank and oyster catcher survey, and there was a white-tailed seagull in the harbour this morning, 300 metres away from me, and I couldn't blimmin' see it. So this is one of the birds that had been reintroduced on the Isle of Wight as part of the Seagull project over there, and it arrived into the harbour last night and was scooting around. And probably almost certainly, actually, we looked at the data last night. Tim McCrill very kindly showed us the data, and it tracked across the Wareham Channel, which is where CJ7 and 022 hang out constantly. So there's a very good chance, actually, they would have interacted or at least seen each other yesterday, this seagull and CJ7. So basically it's kind of, it happens in Finland, it happens in Holland, it happens in Norway. You know, it happens all across their range across the north. You know, these birds interact all the time. I think once the population densities get too high, then there might be a bit of altercation, but it doesn't generally seem to be a problem.
The main thing that we hear is that, so white-tailed eagles are kleptoparasitic, which means they'll often take food from other species. So commonly in Scandinavia and places like that, you do hear of ospreys catching a fish, an eagle chases them, and quite wisely, the osprey drops the fish and goes, I'll go for another one, you take that one. So that could be something that we see in Poole Harbour in the coming decades, but they definitely coexist in other parts of the world.
Yeah. I mean, the more I hear about this, the more this is like a Channel 4, kind of, reality TV show with birds. It's brilliant. The drama is just keeping my edge on my seat. One last question before you go, because we are 3 minutes to 9. When you are lucky and fortunate enough to have your first breeding pair, Martin, we don't have his second name, Martin asked what plans will be put in place for distance public viewing, that as you can see at Lochgarren, Glaslyn and Dovey. So what kind of plans do you have in place for people to view? Yeah, so that's going to be a possibility.
Yeah. So we're working with all the landowners at the moment, because there's obviously a very real possibility that this time next year we'll have, a breeding pair, as long as CJ7 and 022 return. Fortunately for us, the site where they are is completely private, and the landowner is adamant that it stays that way. But there's going to be, there will be opportunities for us to plan so people can see the birds and learn about the birds. But security and their welfare is obviously the utmost important. So we're not planning anything immediately, because obviously we need to get to that stage first of all where the birds are nesting. So it'll probably, even if they do nest next year, we'll kind of keep it just on the webcam for people to be able to view, and then we'll start then maybe thinking about viewing opportunities the year after that. So it is, I mean, we've been thinking about all that kind of stuff for a long time now, because obviously there will come a point where people will want to see the birds, but if we do our boat trips right the way through August as well, so if people are keen to come and learn about the projects and see some migrant ospreys and obviously some of ours flying around, then they can always pop along on one of those. But yeah, in terms of some volunteers,
because I did have a question from somebody, I think it was Sammy, talking about volunteering. They can just go to your website and find about opportunities to give their time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, when the birds, I mean, it's quite limited at the moment because we've just got the translocation element, which is fairly intense. We've got a specialist team working on that. However, once birds start nesting, then absolutely there's going to be a volunteer network of people that we're going to kind of want to work with, who can talk to people about the birds, show them the birds, and yeah, it'll kind of skyrocket from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is an amazing talk. Honestly, that has been brilliant for me. Somebody coming from, geology into the world and drama of ospreys. It's been phenomenal. Thank you both so much, Brittany and Paul from Birds of Poole Harbour.
Thank you very much.
Awesome, absolutely brilliant talk. Just to wrap up this evening, we're going to say thanks to Birds of Poole Harbour for giving us an incredible talk about ospreys. Again, if you would like to donate, if you have enjoyed this talk, if you'd like to see more, please go to our website, wessexmuseums.org.uk/donation to, kind of help us out. Give a little bit if you want to see more talks like this, and that would be very much appreciated. We also would like to thank our sponsors, Strategic Solutions, for all their support for the Wildlife in the Red exhibition. Next up, we have on the 15th of July at 4:30 p.m. is an arts workshop by Daryl Wakelam. So this is a little bit different. So if you have any kind of younger family members, or indeed anybody in your family that enjoys kind of crafting and making beautiful sculptures out of recycled materials, please join us for a cardboard creature challenge. We're going to be challenging Daryl, and Daryl is a huge artist right now. He has over 12,000 followers on Twitter at the moment. We're going to be challenging Daryl to make an endangered species out of recycling and junk materials. He's going to be giving step-by-step instructions live in that kind of brilliant session, and you'll be able to kind of make it along as he tells you how to do it. So thank you ever so much, everybody, and we wish you a very good evening.